You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. Delighted to be joined by Ed Rossiter, the group co-CEO of Phoenix. Ed, you're very welcome to episode 187.
187. That's a lot. It's great to be here. Thanks a million for having me.
Yeah, delighted to have you. It sure is a lot. Last year for 8 months, I did an episode every single day of the week,
Wow.
consecutively. Didn't miss a day. So there was a lot of episodes recorded last year. Ed, typical fashion of the show is we start with kind of getting to know you, where you grew up, some influences and whatnot, and then we'll jump into the main part. So your accent's throwing me off. I see that you went to secondary
Hmm.
school in Wexford, so I'm assuming you grew up there, but there's a Limerick twang to your accent as well. So I'm guessing you grew up in Wexford and now live in Limerick.
Grew up in Wexford, moved to Limerick for college, and stayed here for a few years. Then did 5, 6 years in Dublin, and married a Limerick woman. So I'm back here again as of end of last summer. So my accent's probably more confused than it is attached to anywhere else, I'd say. Depending on where I am, different parts come out, but it doesn't take too long for the Wexford twang to come out when I'm back home. That's for sure.
No, that's definitely for sure. What was life like growing up in Wexford?
Great. Pretty normal upbringing, good school. Lived in the country, small primary school. I think there was maybe 5 or 6 people in my class, about 25 people in the whole school. So um, lived near the beach. Yeah, it was a nice upbringing. Loads of GA. Got into rugby later in life, I suppose. And that kind of ultimately brought me to Limerick as well as college.
I do want to touch on that in a bit, but the beach,
Sure.
GA, and a small group of friends sounds like the ideal upbringing. Um, Tell me this. Typically, people can point to a handful of people that have had a massive impact on their early years that have shaped who they've become today, whether an acquaintance, a teacher, a family relative, a close family member, parents, perhaps. Does any one or two people spring to mind for you?
It's a good question. I suppose the immediate ones would be parents, both very different characters, I would say. Mom is a nurse, soon to be retired, but a farmer's daughter, tough out, get up and get on with it type of attitude. Doesn't get stressed too often. Um, Dad is a townie, if you want to call it that. And yeah, he was always in sales. He was CEO of an IT software company, and from a business perspective was always quite entrepreneurial. Early days, remember him setting up a promotional gift company, and just seeing that buzz around the office, and even growing into maybe mature teenager years, he would often pose a question saying, I wonder who's supplying that product to this business. And it would follow on from questions from my side saying, what does that mean? And there would be teachings along the way around how the world works, but very, very basic stuff. And yeah, I think both different approaches to life, but um, both very, very impactful, I'd say, on both myself and my brother, and probably made us who we are today.
Nice. Well, shout out to both your parents. You touched on university in Limerick. You went to UL to study business. Why UL and why business?
Um, so I got into rugby, was probably too slow and too square to be running around a GA pitch at the same level as some of the guys I was playing with. So eventually got onto a rugby pitch, and that probably suited me a lot more. As per usual, did the whole university campus tours like you would in your final year in school, and did the UCD one, the Trinity one, and I remember arriving in UL and just been blown away by it. Probably helped that at the time Munster were in their pomp, 2006 year, and um, I think even the day we arrived down there, they were training, and just totally blown away by facilities. The UL of today, down there every week, just walking through it. It's levels above what I think is any other university in Ireland from a sporting perspective. And yeah, all my CAO choices were Limerick because that's where I wanted to go. And regardless of what I got in terms of course, I was going to Limerick. So just made an impression on me from the get go.
Awesome. Well, jumping into the working world, I've looked at a few of your previous roles on LinkedIn, and I want to jump into two of them specifically. So, you spent 2 years as owner of Limelight magazine, at the
Yeah.
time number one Limerick's number one social magazine, 20,000 students every month. You said you'd noticed a gap in the market for a free magazine targeted towards that kind of age group, 18 to 30 plus. Um, you started in your bedroom, made sales calls, etc., etc., etc. What lessons or perhaps lessons you learned or skills you improved in that journey?
Um, Probably a bit of wordsmithing there. So I think it was the only social magazine in Limerick at the time, so it was number one by default. But that's a good salesperson's take on that. It, like most things in life, I think you get maybe pushed into doing certain things because obviously the world was very different. 2010, coming out of recession, or still in recession, the height of it. I remember I applied for jobs with some FMCG businesses stacking shelves in your Duns and Tesco's and merchandising, and I was getting beaten by people with 20 years sales rep experience. It was bleak enough, especially for graduates. So um, I was probably lucky enough that I'd saved a bit of money from over the years, and I think my family would have always been quite supportive about give something a shot. What's the worst thing that can happen? It can always be chalked down to experience. And I would have worked multiple jobs growing up, teenage years and even earlier. So was never really afraid of the hard work part. And we set up the magazine, and we got some amazing clients. We used to launch every magazine in a bar in town. We'd have a Heineken or Core sponsor, free beers. We used to have the likes of Hermitage Green, number of other bands as well that would launch the magazine for that month. And it was proper kind of sales. Then there was the content side. We used to work closely with journalist students in UL who wanted to be published in something, so they would do the articles, and I would be door to door sales. So yeah, like it certainly solidified the sales skills. That's for sure. And albeit a tiny business, it gave you some sort of grasp of what it's like to do something in the business world. So probably where I maybe ignited the entrepreneurial flair a little bit.
I love to hear that. Not long after, a couple of years after you moved into kind of the corporate world, you spent some time at Morgan McKinley, 4 years, if I'm correct. You obviously impressed there because within those 4 years, you had a number of promotions. Um, what was it like, that transition from, self-employed, which is not easy, it's a complete graft, to large corporate?
Yeah, so I think before Morgan McKinley, I was BDO. So BDO and Limerick have a recruitment leg. So do a lot of executive search assignments for the accountancy clients that they work with, and bit of a standalone business even within the BDO brand. Obviously, that's an accountancy firm, an advisory firm. So it was interesting to see, how professionals actually operate and how they think. And it was very different to wheel and deal in magazines around town. How it came about, to be honest, the magazine was never going to make huge money. It's sustainable money. It was more about the experience. So I think a friend of mine happened to be working in BDO in a similar role, and he was leaving, and one thing led to another, ended up there. But that was great. It gave me a taste of what recruitment looked like, or some sort of insight, and how to manage clients and obviously find suitable talent and bring them both together. Um, and I decided it was for me. And I guess if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it right in my head, which would be a big corporate brand in that space, recruitment specific. And luckily, Morgan McKinley were hiring in Limerick at the time. So it was a short hop up the road, really, but obviously into a much bigger structure and into, I guess, a formalized learning and development platform, and a really well established brand, and a really well run brand, to be honest.
Nice. Let's move on to Phoenix, where you currently are. You'll do a much better job at the elevator pitch or 30-second commercial than I will, because it's your baby. So the mic is yours.
Phoenix. So set it up late 2018. Um, I was the founder, shortly joined by my other group co-CEO and business partner, Ruth Linden. And since then, we've grown from just myself to nearly 40 people. We've opened offices in Dublin, Limerick, London. We're launching our first US office in September, October time this year. Our overall aim is to be at 250 people by the end of 2025. Um, Across the world, obviously multiple locations. And we primarily focus on tech, fintech, financial services, and professional services brands. Um, I guess point of differentiation for us would be a lot of the senior leaders in the business are actually professionally qualified. So Ruth being a great example, qualified solicitor, worked in top tier law firms. Individuals across the business that lead divisions are qualified in that space. We have a number of qualified accountants and investment banking professionals and tax professionals. So although it's a recruitment business, there's probably an elevated level of service that we tend to offer that maybe sometimes you don't see in that sector.
So Ed, something I've noticed is that you recently went through a fundraising round. And we were just talking about your plans to grow to 250 headcount by 2025. So talk me through the fundraising round.
Yeah, so it's very recent. We actually announced it at the Dublin Tech Summit. For us, we've been very lucky. We had a small investor at the start of setting up Phoenix, which allowed us to even grow by a couple of headcount and cover expenses. And due to our performance, I guess we've been incredibly lucky that that exact investor is now doubling down on what he's seen in us, and we have recently raised €1 million to support our growth over the next few years, which is ambitious and is going to be used totally for growth, probably overseas in the UK and the US as well.
So I have a number of questions to ask around the business, but I'm going to start with, you said 2025 you want to be at about 250 employees. That I love to see that goal. You're obviously going to need to attain a number of net new logos to get to that. Um, for you at the moment, if we look over the next 12 months time frame, what are some things that you're going to leverage to win some net new logos? Partnerships, speaking. I know that you just spoke at Dublin Tech Summit,
Yeah.
perhaps outbound, your podcast that you're doing in collaboration with Business Post. Talk me through some of the things that you're leveraging to get some net new logos on board over the next 12 months.
Um, so when you say net new logos, you mean clients?
Clients, yes.
Yeah, so we're pretty lucky to be honest. We've a very strong individual reputation anyway, and a lot of the so we deal with 4 or 5 of the Irish unicorns. We've helped them grow internationally across the US and Europe. We are based obviously in Ireland and London, but we do global work, and we tend to help our clients grow globally. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be new clients in every location. It can be the same client across multiple locations, and that strengthens the relationship for us. New clients is always important, of course. But the key to our growth actually is our own people. We've since the start probably over invested in areas where maybe other agencies typically wouldn't. We have fully fledged learning and development team and program for everyone from a graduate level to my level. Everyone plugs into a learning and development program. We have an L&D platform um, that we use as well, which has thousands of hours of learning and development on that too. We have a back office which we've built in Limerick, which consists of our finance operations, and I mentioned talent acquisition, HR, learning and development. So that supports the wider group. Um, and from a sales perspective, we're lucky that the key leaders in the business are very commercial, and from reputation and obviously just from consistent branding, we've always won't say found it easy, but we have positioned ourselves well to be front and center for a lot of clients in our space, for sure.
One thing I noticed on your LinkedIn is you've got a decent following, and I'm curious uh, how that has helped, or if it has helped in business, in terms of like it could help in terms of showcasing to your current clients that they're dealing with the best out there. It could help with landing new clients, or perhaps landing speaking gigs like the Dublin Tech Summit. Talk me through how LinkedIn, or other, you could take leverage the podcast as another social tool, has helped the business.
I think it's probably coming from an appetite to do things maybe slightly differently. I think, most Irish people, including myself, are quite reserved when you compare yourself to
Mm.
maybe people in the US or even the UK, which we've seen regularly. You want to be good, but don't say you're too good. You want to be big, but not too big. And I think there's sometimes a hesitancy to put yourself in maybe more public situations where you are held up for a bit of criticism. So I've never really been too afraid of that, even though I wouldn't tend to be that controversial. But from the get go, podcast was something I was doing anyway with individuals in our space, and the way we viewed that was we're having very unique, insightful, value add conversations with business leaders every single day. What if we put a spotlight on that and opened it up so everyone could learn something, and that's really what has driven our business forward, is we always want to add value in some sort of a unique way.
Yeah.
um, we were approached by the Business Post. They wanted to do something um, on an employment podcast. So we've partnered with them quite successfully for the last few years. And um, outside of that, we obviously, outside of COVID, we would do in-person events, roundtables, and the Tech Summit obviously is our most recent one, which was great to get the opportunity to speak on that panel as well. So I think maybe an appetite to do more in areas that maybe most businesses are a little bit hesitant to put themselves out there in.
Mm. And I'm going to leave links to your podcast below where people are listening or watching this, because I mentioned to you before we hit the record button that I'm driving to the city after this, and I've downloaded the Bobby Healy podcast. I'm looking forward to listening to that. And then you suggested that I listen to the Pat Phelan. So there's a
Yeah.
number of big names. I think the CEO of Wayflyer, was that, am I correct with that? He was
Yeah.
on
So
recently?
yeah, Aidan, great client of ours, amazing story. Obviously, one of the more recent unicorn businesses. So we've helped the guys grow globally from early days. Pre-unicorn status, there's a few people in a basement in Dublin, and that's been an amazing success story. And we've obviously been proud enough to be a small part of that anyway, in terms of their
Yeah.
growth story. But yeah, our guests have been amazing. You have everyone from Van Saunders in Denton's, who's managing partner in Ireland, to heads of HR for Dropbox, to obviously the likes of Aidan, Pat, Bobby. We have Anya Kerr from Kinsen joining us tomorrow, which will be going out soon, and always looking for more guests. So anyone that's listening, let me know.
So anyone listening, you've now got at least 3 reasons to listen to that podcast. Um, Something I'm saying time and time again more recently is people posting on social platforms saying I've been let go and I'm looking for a job. Um and I don't know what side of the fence I sit on when it comes to that. Because I don't know if that's something that I would do. I think I would make an effort to pick up the phone and call people and leverage my network. But again, I don't know what situation they're in. But the question I have for you, someone who owns the business that you own, what's one or two common things that you see with job seekers that perhaps frustrate you?
Ooh, um, maybe I'm probably not as detail orientated as my business partner Roots, but she's a solicitor, so we'll pin it to that. But I think messy CVs is certainly one. Um, there's plenty of downloadable templates. There's even one on our website if you want to check it out. But there's probably no excuse nowadays, given the information that everyone has access to online, where you can't have a presentable, informative CV. And another one, lack of preparation, I would say, for interviews. There's probably in the last few years, there's been obviously an incredibly competitive jobs market, and everyone's heard of the war for talent, and then there was the Great Resignation. Now there's the Great Revaluation, apparently is the new one, which probably reflects the drop in value for tech stocks, and that's probably where you're seeing the I've been made redundant
Yeah.
posts a little bit more. Um, so it's been a very, very interesting 3 years in the employment space. But regardless of that lack of research for interview, and I think interviews have become incredibly easy to get, and they've been incredibly easy to probably lower your standards, I would say, because you haven't had to make that excuse to say you're going to a doctor's appointment or change into your suit or interview wear in a toilet in your office and sneak out the back door. It's all been pretty much from home. Technically could be done in your slippers and pajamas as long as you have a shirt on or whatever. So that's probably a frustration point for us, because it's been maybe too easy for people to interview, and it's hard to gauge how serious they are at times. But from a preparation perspective, get your CV in order, get it looking sharp, and then obviously, if you get the opportunity to interview, make sure you do your research and you're prepared fully.
I was going to leave a link to your website below, but I'll also leave a link to the specific part of your website that has that CV template people can leverage. Couple more questions for you, Ed. If you were ever to write a book, what would the title of the book be?
God, I've no idea. Is there a better question than that?
Final
What would
question would be, and I hope this one doesn't throw you.
go for it?
If you were Minister for Education that had to add a mandatory subject to the Leaving Cert curriculum, what would you add and why?
Oh, that's easy. Um, Finance, and not finance from an accounting perspective, but a day-to-day how to manage your finance. Something that I probably learned later in life around even pensions and the impact of what you do early on in your career, pension wise, for example, and the greater impact that can have later in life. That would be one. I think entrepreneurship is certainly something that should be taught. I think there's sometimes maybe a bit of a romantic notion around setting up your business, and everyone can do it nowadays, and it is a hell of a lot of work. And I think one big reason as to why we've even got to where we are, which is step one of our journey, is because we want to do it. We want to be here, and the late nights and long weekends and all the stress that comes with it. You'd want to do it. I think that's the big thing. Luckily for us, we do. But maybe there's a misconception at the moment where you know setting up a business can be in your bedroom, and there's all the romantic stories of scaling to $1 billion business in your sleep, and this kind of stuff, which probably doesn't reflect the reality a lot of time.
It's a question I always ask my guests at the end of the podcast, and I found out yesterday. I learned that the very last exam for this year's Leaving Cert was politics, which I didn't know was a subject.
Interesting. My wife's a teacher, accounting and business, so more traditional subjects, but yeah, it's something that we talk about a bit at home. A bit of entrepreneurship and insight into that. You do see it in college, right? So
Yeah.
don't see why not bring it into the secondary system.
Ed, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I'll leave links to your socials, website, anything else we mentioned during the podcast, wherever people are listening or watching to this. But for today, thanks for being my guest, and I wish you continued success.
No problem. Thanks a million for having me.